8 or 9 opponents, 8 or 9 SEC games each and every season. I want to go down the pros and cons of both. What do you think of the concept of 8 or 9? Because it will have a big difference on the amount of permanent opponents, will have a big difference on the landscape of what SEC teams are able to do. So, what do you think, 8 or 9?
I mean, I think it's owed to the fans for there to be 9. That allows a little more competitive balance. So it's not completely, if you do this one division, 16 teams in a pod system, it allows for at least a little more competitive balance where there's not a giant distance in the type of schedules 2 different teams will play. And it's just better games in general. You look, for the sake of fans don't deserve Texas, San Antonio, UConn, and Austin P all together.
Amen. Amen. And you're going my direction. Keep preaching.
Yeah. So I think it's 9. I will say this. I understand why the schools want to do 8. And this leads to something I have to bring up again, and I've harped on this. This leads, and I see his philosophy now, to me, to Greg Sankey's philosophy on negotiating. So one of the underrated holdups, guys, with the 8 or 9 games is 8 games with more easy non-conference games increases the likelihood that more SEC teams get into bowl games, so they get more payout from those bowl games, and they increase the likelihood of their appearing in college football playoff games, New Year's Six games. The reason they're doing that is because Greg Sankey did not negotiate a good deal with ESPN. He should have demanded twice as much as what they offered him. He negotiated that deal before Texas and Oklahoma joined. And it sounds like ESPN is like, yeah, we're sticking with this sweet deal y'all gave us where we massively underpaid. And so I would say, I understand the school saying, hey, if ESPN wants the marquee games, that's why they want 9. They want more marquee games. I understand the school in the SEC saying, if you want marquee games, if you want more marquee games, give us more money. And Sankey is against that philosophy. He came out yesterday and he said money follows. And I'm like, no, money leads. It doesn't follow. I'm sorry.
No. Here's exactly what you need to think about with the 2 schedule models. And it's SEC spring meetings that are going on right now in Destin, Florida. An 8-game model would have members play 1 assigned SEC rival annually, plus 7 additional opponents that rotate in alternating years. A 9-game model would have members play 3 assigned SEC rivals annually, plus 6 additional opponents that rotate in alternating years. Here's the deal. You definitely want 9. And the reason you want 9 is a philosophical reason of that the SEC is going to be considerably better. So while you may play a Vanderbilt, really that's pretty much it right now, because we've seen Missouri and Kentucky have good seasons. Obviously South Carolina last year. So while you may play a Vanderbilt, and that may be a part of your 3 assigned SEC rivals on the 9-game opponent, well, good for you. I mean, that's probably going to be Tennessee, and I don't know that anybody else is going to have a surefire opponent as part of that 3 assigned SEC rivals, but there is Vanderbilt. So that helps Tennessee. But regardless, you want to see more SEC games. You want to see more SEC teams playing each other. That's my big picture philosophical thrust of this if I were making a decision. I want to see South Carolina play LSU, even though it's not a tradition right now. But I want to see more SEC games on an annual basis. So that's where I am. I think it builds the conference. I think that right now with the 12-team playoff, if you went 8 games and I'm an athletic director, I'm sitting back and I'm Mr. Burns. And I'm very, very intent on scheduling 4 cupcakes. And my non-cup cupcake is going to be like a Virginia, which is still a cupcake. It just has a bigger, more known name. So with a 12-team playoff, you're going to have 4 cupcakes if you go with an 8-game model. Whereas a 9-game, you've got 9 bona fide SEC teams. So that ain't a cupcake. Now you can do what you want to with the other 3. Philosophically, that's where I am. You agree or disagree, Caleb?
Philosophically, I'm with you. Philosophically, I'd keep the divisions. I'd want 2 8-team divisions, move Alabama and Auburn into the East, Missouri into the West, and you play the divisions every year, because I think philosophically, it's more important to have annual rivals. that drives the conference. I mean, Tennessee playing Auburn, Tennessee losing their annual rivalry with Auburn was, I know, a gut punch to a lot of older fans when this division changed in 1992. If Tennessee lost Alabama every year, and forget Tennessee, Alabama, I mean, how many rivalries would go by the wayside? Annual rivalries. People care about things like the series record in these rivalries, getting revenge, things like that. And if you do the 3-6, it gets a little better, but it's still Tennessee, South Carolina is one of the rivalries. So they're going to lose Kentucky and Georgia and Florida. And so I think that's where philosophically, I'm for the divisions. Still, I understand where the SEC is coming from not doing it. I will say I understand, but I would say that ESPN's got to pony up, man. This is too good of a deal for them. They should be willing to pony up more money.
I'm not questioning that deal like you are because I think the SEC's got something else in their back pocket. I don't think they make bad deals. And I think that they take into account the Marty and McGee show, for instance, talks a lot about the SEC. I think they take into account that ESPN is going to move towards being a very big proponent of the SEC and what they cover on SportsCenter. So I think some of that stuff is tough to put an actual value on, Caleb, but that's why I did like the deal. So if we're sitting here having the conversation and the deal is strictly what it was on paper and you're not promoting the heck out of the SEC on SportsCenter every single night in the fall over other conferences, then yes, the SEC got the short end of the stick. But I think there's a gentleman's agreement that they're going to be covered at a very, very high level. I go back to the NHL. Was it Gary Bettman? And when ESPN signed up the NHL again, which they didn't have them for years, here's exactly what Gary Bettman said. He said, well, if you guys do half as good of a job of covering me as you did burying me, then I should be very happy with this deal. So you can get buried by ESPN. I'm not saying the Big Ten is going to get buried, okay? But do I need to see a feature on an Oregon State quarterback who's never going to be relevant because of all the changes in conference realignment? Or would I rather see a story on a linebacker at Kentucky that could mess up Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee's title run? I think that's what you're going to see, and that has some value to it that may not be actually on printed page, if that makes sense.
That probably does. They still could have gotten probably $2 billion more out of the deal.
Agreed. There's they didn't get the best deal. There's a happy medium somewhere between what you're saying and what I'm saying.
Yes, because the ESPN they're going to be incentivized by that. You know, you don't have to worry about the gentleman's agreement. ESPN is going to be incentivized to cover the SEC no matter what because they spend all this money on the SEC. It's not like the NBA asked ESPN to overcover them, as we know they do. ESPN's like, we spent a lot of money on the rights to NBA games. We need to cover them to make sure people are watching.
Okay, but that's worth something, right? I mean, what is that? That's kind of innate. Yeah, I can tell you, I can sell you something. I can sell you a car for $1,000. But if I tell you, if you know me, okay, first boat I ever bought was from Mike Stoll, who played offensive lineman for Tennessee. There was a comfort there in knowing that if I had a little issue with the boat, I could call him and he would say, oh, here's what you do. The starter does this. You just have to replace that. So there is something there that's a partnership that is more than just the cash exchanged, right?
Yes, I agree. But
they still could have got $2 billion more.
You run a publicly, I mean, you're an investor. So pretend you run a publicly traded company. Okay. Yes, you need your value and your brand to be good. You also need people to think that you're more valuable than you are, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay. That's the problem with the SEC. The SEC is what Greg Sankey is doing is making the brand second to none. Best brand in America. By far. One, you don't have to work that hard. It already is the best brand in America. And Greg Sankey is making that brand superb and amazing. But the thing is, if you're going to make the brand superb and amazing, you should have some negotiators to negotiate a superb and amazing deal. You need people to perceive you as more valuable than the Big Ten. And right now, networks still don't perceive the SEC as more valuable than the Big Ten. That's stupid. They are more valuable than the Big Ten. There are 10 SEC teams. probably in the top 20 that bring in revenue, and maybe 4 in the Big Ten, maybe 5. And the Big Ten is getting deals worth twice as much. Yes, misnegotiated, but here's what they did. The Big Ten was like, hey, let's get the money first, and then we'll do some horse trading to make sure it works out. And they'll probably be okay with that. Whereas the SEC is going, let's make our brand on rock solid foundation as great as possible, and then see what money comes with that. I'm like, okay, no, make your brand rock solid, but you need to have negotiators to make sure you get more than properly paid for that brand.
Okay, so let's say it's a 9-game schedule. Who wins, who loses? I actually think Tennessee is going to be one of the bigger winners because of their ties to Kentucky and Vanderbilt. You're not going to leave Vanderbilt out. So let's say it's a 9-game schedule. That's a permanent opponent. Kentucky might be that. Alabama might be that. You would think that either way, it's not going to be Vanderbilt, Alabama, and Georgia, right? So Tennessee probably loses Georgia if they go to a 9-game and they don't continue with the divisions. That's good for Tennessee. Who's it bad for? I think it's bad for Alabama. I think Alabama, if their 3 permanent opponents are LSU, Auburn, and who else has been kicked around that Nick Saban
Tennessee.
got riled up?
It was LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee.
Tennessee, of course. I mean, that to me is pretty daunting. You have, and I'm not saying just because of recency bias. I think Auburn's always going to play you tough. I think LSU, even with a guy like, what's up, Hook? Even like with a guy like Ed Orgeron, I think that you can still play for championships and be a tough out. Now you do have a Josh Heupel at a Tennessee. I think Alabama is probably the loser in the 9-game schedule out of all the schools that I could point out.
Yeah, that's why they're heading to Destin this week with Nick Saban favoring an 8-game schedule when Nick Saban has ranted about wanting a 9-game schedule for the past 10 years. But knowing what, I don't blame him for that either. So yeah, Alabama's a big loser. I'll tell you what, Tennessee's a winner either way. They're a winner on the 3-6. They're also a winner on the 1-7. Because if it's the 1-7, Tennessee's permanent opponent is Vanderbilt every year.
So what is the 1-7?
If the conference does 8 games,
okay,
you'll have one
games.
permanent opponent.
Okay.
You'll have one permanent opponent and 7 rotating. Tennessee's one permanent opponent is going to be Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I mean they do win either way, and you could certainly. I just don't want to see schools be able to be at Tennessee or anybody else be able to play 4 Patsies. I don't want to see 4 Austin Peays because I think if you go with the 8-game schedule, there's no reason not to do that from a pragmatic standpoint. Get in the playoff, see what happens. And that's exactly what you're going to see.
Well, yeah, not just get in the playoff, get to a bowl game. Because, again, the payouts, the revenue from bowl games, and this is what the SEC is looking at this weekend. This is why I keep saying the deal with ESPN was relevant, was there's an incentive now to make sure you maximize there's payouts for conferences that put teams in the playoff, conferences that put teams in bowl games. By the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but this is a really big issue that they haven't figured out with the 12-team college football playoff yet. There's payouts to the conference per team that gets in the bowl games. What happens, Dave, when the SEC puts 4 teams in the playoff, the Pac-12 puts 1 team in? Like the SEC is getting 4 times the revenue for the playoff. That's going to be an issue that's going to be a sticking point for a lot of other schools, and the SEC is going to sit riding high on that. And that's another incentive for them to stick with 8 games.
True. Okay, so before I ask you what ends up happening, I'll remind everybody it's brought to you by crafttreats.com. Crafttreats.com, absolutely phenomenal for your pet. They can help with the arthritis issues. They can help with the social anxiety. They can also help with, how about digestive issues? Because they've got the CBD derivative in there, the chill pills. Go to crafttreats.com, use the promo code Off the Hook. The promo code Off the Hook, get 20% off. That's right, 20% off. And all you got to do is go to crafttreats.com. They have non-CBD treats as well, but use the promo code Off the Hook to get 20% off homemade, holistic, fantastic pet treats. So do they end up with 8 or 9? Who are the permanent opponents and how strongly do you feel? I think Greg Sankey on Memorial Day evening passed along the message that he really, really wants 9. It's not his decision. It is the ultimate decision of the schools. However, I think it's going to be 9, and I think that's where you're going to see it sit. And some people are going to get the short end of the stick. Some people are not. but I believe that it's going to be the 9. And I think Tennessee's 3 will be pretty simple. It'll be Alabama, it'll be Kentucky, and it'll be Vanderbilt. I think that Alabama is the loser because of permanent opponents. And somebody asked, oh, they're already playing LSU and Auburn and Tennessee. Well, they are, but they would continue to play those teams even if they went away from division play. So that's where it gets challenging. I think Alabama is the significant loser in this regard. That's a pretty tough trio to play each and every year. You go into the year saying if you go 2-1 of those 3 teams, you've had a good season, and that's not what Alabama is used to.
So I'm going to break from you a little bit. I don't think Tennessee's are very obvious. I think it's actually going to be Vanderbilt, Alabama, and South Carolina because they have to find 3 teams to play South Carolina. And so I think that's going to be Tennessee's 3rd team. They're going to lose their rivalry with Kentucky. I'm with you. Alabama's the loser. I'm also with you. They go to 9 games. And the reason I think they go to 9 games is there has to be some level of confidence in their commissioner projected. And look, Dave, the way you and I feel about Greg Sankey, we're kind of a little bit on. I don't say I have no confidence in Greg Sankey. I know that you're very bullish on you think he's 5 steps ahead of all of us. And maybe he is, but I'll tell you this much. For his sake, the SEC better do 9 games because if they go 8 games, that is a first sign of maybe a lack of confidence in Greg Sankey as the commissioner, given how much he's pushed for 9 games and how hard he's pushed for it. And I don't think he just dropped the whole we need to do 9 games last night for no reason. I think that is a purposeful, meticulous, calculated way to pressure the schools to try to make sure they do 9 games.
No question in my mind.